Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we just began the class, the chapter 8, the yoga of the imperishable Brahman. And Arjuna asked the questions of what is Adibhutam, Adidevyam, Adiyajnam, and how we're self-controlled at the time of death. How do we know the self? So in fact, he's actually asking, how would we know if we were self-realized? The very fact that he's asking that, he's not self-realized. That he's recognized that his friend has something more than just being his friend. So he's asking these questions that have been, he's heard these words before. There's no way of actually explaining the self other than the way we're doing it. One can't know the self from this terrestrial realm. It's all indicating, offering attributes to say what it might be. And there's so many. So there's different methods of way we learn by inference comparison. We use the tradition of what the sages may have achieved so that they say what it is. But it doesn't mean that we're understanding it. So they give us a structure of where we can tread that path to reach it. It's like not knowing the destination of a country you've never been to, but you get all the directions, so you get an idea. Before you go away on holiday, you probably look on the internet now and figure out all the things that you want to see and do. But you've never been there. You don't know what it is until you reach there, and it's nothing like the pictures. So they give you the best they can. So we, on our journey, bring our mind and intellect to a confluence so we can project what we understand, and we can project something beyond it to move on our actual journey. So Krishna answers that supreme individual is called Adi Atman, and there's a creative urge. So it's giving it from a relative stance, this answer, not from an absolute. So there's a creative urge, swabhava. That's the imperishable Akshara Atman in us. So there's a residing deity within all of us, this Atman. But the reality is the Atman, neither the Brahman, neither creates nor destroys. But it's giving us this idea of creation so that we maneuver on it. Just like we go into a place of worship and we have a deity, we recognize this all-pervading principle, deity within us. And through yajna, karma, we act on it and move ourselves towards it. So it's looking from a manifestation point of view and projecting wherever, just like the sun, wherever there's a reflecting medium, you see a reflected sun. Similarly, wherever there's from a relative perspective, an individuality. There's a deity, all-pervading, imperishable aspect of us, which we're after. So we've got some element in us that guides us to that supreme. So the Atman, thus, the Akshara Brahman, is one and the same. And that creative urge enables that individuality in the Brahman. It's all from a relative perspective. It's just to get you to think, to get back. So it's just like a painter has a creative urge, but it doesn't mean to say they're painting all the time. It's only when they identify with the painting that the painting comes out, or an idea. So that creative force is called karma. The Brahman, the imperishable, is just in the world a reflection, a manifestation. So many things perish in the world, but the Brahman remains. That reality remains. The reality is, from the absolute perspective, there is no creative urge. There is just Brahman. So I know it's maybe sounding a bit complicated, but this is giving us an idea of how this Brahman resides in us as an individual jiva, an individual being. So we can utilize that to maneuver out of our limited stance to get to that imperishable stance. So to Brahman, the knowledge and ignorance is all one and the same. Relatively speaking, this projection is a superimposition on the Brahman. So there's an illusion which exists, but we're in that illusion. And we make the mistake thinking the rope is the snake, but it's just a superimposition on the Brahman. So no world has ever been created, they put forward. It's a superimposition on the Brahman as a statement which everybody here, most of you would have heard, I think, that Brahma Satyam Jagat Nityam. I think many of you might have heard that. Anybody heard that? Brahma Satyam Jagat Nityam. So it's really putting forward Brahman's the truth. The world's an illusion. It's a very common statement which is said often in Hindu culture. Nobody understands the magnitude of that statement. So it's like you mentioned, the ocean is vast, but many waves come out of it, and the bigger waves swallow the little waves. But the ocean is deep and imperishable. We give examples which we can understand. The Brahman is imperishable. Many things come out, manifestations come out of it from a relative perspective. So let's go. Everybody's okay. We had a question last week which we didn't answer, I noticed. If there's any question before we move to forward, or we just, what was the question, Tim?
Last week we were beginning a new chapter, chapter 8, and the question was, does each chapter of the Gita begin with a question?
Anybody? You've got to answer this, not me. Yeah.
the whole Gita is a question and answer. So, I mean, Krishna being the Almighty knows best how he, structured these chapters and how beautifully he gives the answers to the world in the form of a question and answer. So, yes, is the answer, Tim. Every chapter has a question to which then Krishna goes on to giving answers. The only exception being chapter 1 up to chapter 2, verse 11, where it's Arjuna lamenting, but otherwise it's all questions that are being answered.
Anybody else wants to add into that? Ash?
Yeah, I actually thought it was a quick question from Tim. So I actually did look through a few of the verses, and as Vidya said, chapter 1 and 2 are not questions. But I agree. I think the Gita is, it just basically raises questions throughout, although it may not start with it. Yeah, questions about permanence of life, questions on the working and the nature of the mind. Yeah, it raises questions, and it helps us to raise questions within ourselves that we may be asleep to a lot of the time.
Anybody else before we move to 4? Okay. Tim.
It wasn't meant as a trick question. A question allows you to shuffle information so you can understand it better. And although Vidya is right that the whole of the Song of the Lord is a question, if you take the first verse of each of the 18 chapters, they're not all questions. Some of them are fewer statements. They turn into questions, but the first verse of each of the 18 chapters is not necessarily a question.
So you should think of the structure. So essentially it's a Q&A between Krishna and Arjuna, but in the chapters, definitely it's not Q&A at the beginning, then an answer. It's a constant flow. So a statement may be made to actually elicit questions in some ways. In 7, he says, I'll give you knowledge, I'll give you knowledge and wisdom. So we then questioning, how are you giving us wisdom in the whole of the chapter? So yeah. So there's a method in the whole. So next week, before we go to 4, who's going to ask the question? It doesn't matter. You're asking for the whole. But we should get into the habit of asking questions. And maybe this way, when we have a question at the beginning, it doesn't have to be a tricky question. It doesn't have to, it's just a practice. Because from practice, you then also start to stretch yourself. It doesn't matter what the question is, but soon it will matter for yourself when you keep on pulling at your thoughts. And so next week, Tim, I don't want you to put the question forward. Let somebody else do it. You're doing all the hard work for the class year in, year out. So who else is going to volunteer? Doesn't matter what your question is. It can be a quick question. Who's volunteering? Vidya. Okay. So just before the class, just post a day before or something, whenever you want to. We'll just rotate it so everybody gets opportunity. It's no big deal. You can put whatever you want. Related, it will just help us all. Let's go to 4.
Adibhutam sharo bhava purushach adidaivatam adiyajño aham eva atra dehe deha britam varaha.
Renu, if you could read the verse.
Adibhuta is the perishable nature, and Adhyavata is the indweller. I alone am the Adhyagna here in the body, or best of the embodied.
Okay. So we're getting all these adis. Keep getting. So we've got Adibhuta, Adidevata, Adiyajna. So all these adis, all these words, what they're trying to get at is what is the imperishable aspect in you, what is the perishable aspect in you, and what is the imperishable aspect in you. Because all of the time we're identifying with the imperishable, we're identifying with the, if only, we're identifying with the perishable aspect. What's the perishable aspect? Anybody? Babita.
Is it our physical body?
Mm-hmm. Because you know when
Mind.
it's gone, you might not know when your body's gone, but everybody else can see when it's gone. Mind.
Mind and intellect.
Yeah. So that's a perishable aspect. And the world, what about the world? How is that perishable? How can we? Sam?
Well, the world is in constant perishing. The food we eat, the things that flower that grows and dies, and everything.
In fact, it's a good job the beauty of the flower perishes so we get the fruit. It's a good job that some of our loved ones are not there. Otherwise, we'd have people and people and people and people of our people all around us, our families. Can you imagine if there's your grandfather, or your great grandma, your great grandma, your great 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 grandma, all in the same household? So some aspect perishes, next to carry on, then something else manifests. This constant flux of change, the world definition. Constant flux of change, and we are constantly changing. When you leave the class, this class perishes, the next thought comes to fruition. So he's asking us to switch on to the imperishable aspect within that indweller, that Adi, Atman, Adi Devya. When one switches that focus, you're not focusing on the transient aspects, yet you still carry on doing what you're doing, but you're not focused on the transient aspects. You can actually see the goods, the bads happening. You don't get affected by that. You don't get agitated by it. Understand it for what it is. A person gazing at the flower when it drops its petals doesn't get sad when it understands the fruit's coming. and when the fruit is gone and the tree then recuperates or whatever it is. You don't get sad at that because you understand the cycle in a way. So here is trying to get us to comprehend that there's a sentient part and an insentient part in us, and together they make that life. Just like there's a bulb, but the bulb itself doesn't have light. It's when the electricity passes through that bulb, there's a scintillating expression of light. So together they make that light together. That sentient and insentient makes that life. So Atman has no life as we understand it. But when it's in contact with the body, mind, and intellect, that the scintillating expression of life. So when we recognize the Atman within, and we focus on that, it's like you make yourself objective. Nash.
Can I just ask a question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he refers to Adi Yajna, is
Mm-hmm.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that reference to life? Is that what it's referring to?
So
Because
Adi
I understand the body and the
mm-hmm.
and the Atman is the indweller.
Mm-hmm.
What is the third one?
So all of them are referring to the how the individual is there with spirit matter. So Adi Bhutam, the perishable nature, there's behind that is the spirit backing it. Adi Devatam, the indweller, is that individual.
Yeah.
And Adi Yajna, yeah, so Adi Yajna is like that, that karma, that manifestation, that repeat your question.
I was just trying to envisage what Adi Yajna is. I'm just thinking, is it like you said, the electricity, the light bulb, and the light is the result of the matter and the spirit coming together. So it would be life, I guess.
Yes.
With matter and spirit.
Yeah. So it's that consciousness meeting that matter brings that life. Yajna. So when the sentient matter enlivens the sentient, the insentient put together, there's life. So it makes the expression. In fact, let me rephrase that. I've not said it correctly. When spirit and matter come together, there's an expression of life. So when that Atman manifests when that Brahman manifests in terms of the Atman, come together with the perishable matter, there's life. That's Yajna.
And Krishna says, he is that, or
so
I am that life.
So this is all, relatively speaking, to give us an explanation of how we're existing here. That's all.
Thank you.
But we are here. We can't deny that. So we could take away all of those words, and our value is to not focus on the perishable, but to focus on something imperishable to lead us out of that. That makes sense. So we all remember the example of petrol. I think we've had it in this classroom. So the Atman acts like petrol in the car. You don't thank the petrol in the car when it takes you one place to another. But it's without it, you can't maneuver yourself. There's no good or bad petrol to give a good or bad performance. You do that when you drive. So you can't blame it for a crash, or you can't thank it for when you arrive safely. You might have a very powerful performance car or a mini performance car, but you can't attribute the petrol or the electricity nowadays to the battery to one or the other. That's the same. That just operates to enable it, like a catalyst. So in the world, we see creation and destruction. You can't attribute the Atman or the Brahman to that. But without it, nothing's happening. So we're responsible for that. So we get a choice of where we focus our thoughts. That will be up to the type of knowledge or awareness we cultivate in ourselves to direct ourselves. So therefore, it's up to us. So nothing can make us or mar us. We make or mar ourselves. So it's an entire cause and effect from a worldly perspective. So we've got the capacity to direct it. Let's read it.
Adhibuddha refers to the perishable aspect of Brahman, Adhiyagna to the presiding deity, the pure consciousness, Adhidaivata, the jiva, indweller, experiencer. Brahman, the supreme God, pervades the entire manifested world like the waker's mind pervades the entire dream world. Your mind projects itself as the perishable objects in your dream. It also projects as the consciousness and conscious beings appearing in the dream. You understand only upon waking from the dream that all these objects, beings, and experiences of the dream are mere projections of your mind. Similarly, Brahman projects itself as the perishable matter, the consciousness and the conscious beings of this waking world. You will realize this truth only on your spiritual awakening.
So when he says, as you were mentioning, you were asking earlier, so Adhibuddham is the gross aspect, Adhivedam is the subtler aspect, and Adhyajnam is that spark creative aspect. So it's giving the example of just as the dream is, you understand it from the perspective of the waker's mind. You understand in a similar vein the waking state that we know from the perspective of the Brahman is not actually a waking state, it's just another dream. So it's a suggestion to get out of this illusory state. That's the idea. Let's read the next.
Continuing the example used in the preceding verse, Brahman acts as the sun above. When the rays of the sun strike reflecting media, they produce reflected suns. Similarly, Atman, Adiyagna, acting like the rays of Brahman, identifies with matter, Adibhuta, and produces the manifold living beings, Adi Devata,
Devi.
Adi Devi. Krishna addresses Arjuna as Devratamvara, meaning the best among living beings. The Lord considers him as the very best in the society then. In the Gita, Krishna often refers to Arjuna in the superlative, places him on the highest pedestal of human glory.
So remember, we've not talked about this before, perhaps. There's two ways of always looking at the ideas that we're learning about. Is from a relative level and an absolute level. From an absolute level, we put forward, there's Brahman, and Brahman alone exists. There's nothing else. There's only this all-pervading Brahman. But actually, as we exist, relatively speaking, we see we exist. So we put forward an idea that there's this Brahman, which has become relative to us, is within us. Almost like something which we can identify with, relatively speaking, because we don't understand the absolute level. We're not in it. Unless you're in it, you don't know it. And the person in the absolute level can't explain what the absolute is to a person in a waking dream, deep sleep state. You have to use relative terms. So it's explaining here, all these adis are explaining, relatively speaking, what it is that you've got to get to. That makes sense. It puts it in a form that we understand, but we've got to maneuver to. That makes sense. So there is no Brahman, the absolute pervading Brahman doesn't have any creative urge. There is no separation. If something's infinite, you can't separate it. It's all one and the same thing. It's giving us an idea like this so we can focus on something bigger. Let's go to 5. Yes.
Not a profound question, but silly question. This chapter is full of the prefix Adi, Adiyagi, Adiyatman. But Adi is also a common name, is it not? And I wondered, do they have the same root? Like you sometimes meet people who are called Adi, and it sounds wonderful.
Adi Uncle, you know Adi Uncle, you've met him. So often names are used, Sanskrit words are used as names to remind you of something.
So that is the same, it's not just the same sound, it is the same origin.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Aditya, actually. Adi depends how it's shortened. Shri.
Yeah, it's actually Adi, so it's a double A, but in English it gets yeah. So Adi means beginning, Antam means end. So it's in the word Adi itself, it means, it's the primordial reason or the beginning of everything. So it's Adi.
That's good. Sam.
I just had a quick question about the lines that say, similarly, Brahman projects itself as the perishable matter, the consciousness and the conscious beings of this waking world.
Mm-hmm.
You will realize this truth only on your spiritual awakening.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I understand that, to be honest.
Okay. So if we go back to what was put in the previous lines before that. So you understand in your dream, when you're dreaming, you think that's real, yes? You don't think of the waking state, and you see all these things in your dream, whether they're sequential, whether 1 minute you're in 1 minute you're in London, and next minute you're in Canada, the next minute you're another place, all going on. You might meet somebody from your childhood in your dream, and then you might meet somebody that you know now in your dream. You know? So there's a whole mixture of events going on. When you wake up from that dream, you know that that dream is not real, yes? Not in the context of the reality that you understand when you're awake. It's not the same, is it? You know that. So it's your mind, the waker's mind, that projects that dream. You go into a dream state. So that same waker's mind projects that dream, yes? When you wake up, you know it's a dream. When you're in the dream, you don't think it's a dream. You think it's really real. That's the reality then. Though it's from the waker's standpoint, you know it's only a partial reality, because you can never be in this state in Australia and in India and in Canada all at the same time in a few seconds, where in the dream you can. So it's got a partial reality. You know it's not real as that. But you're projecting that from the waker's mind. You project that dream is illusory. Yeah. And you know that when you're awake. It's similarly, Brahman projects itself as perishable matter. We right now see the world and we're quite convinced it's real. Nothing on earth or the universe is going to convince us it's not real. Sometimes we get a glimmer of things that make us suspect, it's not quite real. It looks real, but it's not quite real, within our own illusion. So in that sense, we get a understanding that it's not quite real. So what we can't comprehend is what it's saying is Brahman projects itself as perishable matter. So we see elements like us looking in the mirror. We see ourselves exactly as we are here in the mirror as a reflection. But that reflection is perishable, if that makes sense to you. If you try to clean up the dirt on your face in the mirror by cleaning the mirror, it doesn't work. You have to get to the source yourself. And then when you clean it there, it looks clean in the mirror. So it's just a reflection. So it's just putting forward that, really. The reflection is projected. But from the standpoint of Brahman, there's no reflection. But because we see the world, it's trying to get us to understand, where's it come from? It's like we're looking in the mirror for everything. The whole world that's our mirror. We can't believe that that's not real. So it's kind of trying to make us suspicious. It's not there. If you want to get to the reality of it, that's just the projection. So where's the projection coming from? In this part here, we're saying it's that pure consciousness, that Brahman. But we recognize the world and we keep saying this Brahman is infinite. So we can't understand how is that infinite projecting something perishable, but it's just like looking in the mirror. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes, thank you.
It does say at the end, you will realize this truth on your spiritual awakening. So the idea is to get there and understand that all that's been projected in front of us in this world is not quite real. We got to go within ourselves. That's the little clue. No matter how exciting, tantalizing, important it is, it's not there, it's here. Start with oneself. Just use that to get out. That's what we have to do. 5 is okay. Okay. 5.
अन्तकाले च मामेव स्मरन् मुक्त्वा कलेवरम् यः प्रयाति समद्भावम् याति नास्त्यत्र संशयः.
Nishi, if you could read the verse.
And he who, casting off the body, goes forth thinking of me alone at the time of death, he attains my being. There is no doubt about this.
So, casting off the body, that person who's thinking of me alone at the time of death attains me. Often people make the mistake and think, if my thoughts at the time of death are on the Almighty Brahman, then that's where I'm going. It doesn't quite work like that. It's really talking about how you conduct your life in this world, because the whole world is a cause and effect. And if you've led your life properly, it's very clear where you're heading. So if you've looked after your physical body, you can't say, I want to be fit without doing anything. Do you all agree? You know, if you keep putting junk in your body and don't do anything, you will not find yourself fit. But once you start being selective about what you eat, what you do, what you think, you find yourself in a different predicament. It's not one thought, it's a consistency of thought and then action. So similarly at your emotional level, at the intellectual level, at the spiritual level, where are your thoughts going? If they're always going to the world, there's no way you're going to be fit and healthy spiritually. So you have vasanas. You got to get into the world, but where are your thoughts resting? So there's one thought which is always resting on that self. Whatever you have to do, you understand it, you get on with it like a sakshi. So it's not genes, it's cause and effect. You choose your genes. You decide how it's going to work out. You may be in a predicament where things don't seem quite right. You can change it around, it's mental. I'm just thinking of something that came to mind. There was a minister, David Blunkett. He was a foreign secretary. This is like a few governments back. Foreign secretary, who was blind. Most people couldn't think of doing, he did various roles. Most people can't think of doing that role when they can sight it. He did a really powerful, had a powerful person, he was blind. You make it or mar it mentally. There's so many examples. Beethoven was deaf. You make it or mar it. There's many, many examples like this. So it's not what you've got, it's what you make of it and where you take it. In fact, your disability could be, if you know how to use it, could be ability. It really depends on how you think. So if you don't put in the effort, if you want to be literate, you've got to put in the effort to be literate. Otherwise you'll be illiterate. It's like your effort, your shraddha. So it's a cumulative effect where your life will end. Thinking of me, the Atman, is not just at the end of life. It's a cumulative resultant effect. It's a cause and effect. So it's being aware of what you're thinking now and where it's leading you to. So keeping yourself out of the nonsense and keeping yourself on something higher. Keeping yourself out of negative values and keeping on the higher. One way of cultivating it, that is working for Loka Sangraha. Serving, what's Loka Sangraha? Anybody? It's a way of refining yourself. What does Loka Sangraha mean? Renu.
Is it community, society?
Mm-hmm. So when you serve Loka Sangraha, the whole, your society, community can be your whole universe. Depends where you want to identify and extend it. So you are almost Catholic in serving. That will refine you, keeping your thoughts on something higher. Yajna. That will serve you. So if you're constantly doing that, at the time of death, he attains my being. Really, it means at the time of death of the vasanas. And that might happen to be at the time of your physical death. If you've got rid of them, then off you go. You've merged with that. But not really otherwise. You're not going to get anywhere if you've still got a whole load of thoughts left. It just carries on. It carries forward. So it says, Naste asamshaya, no doubt, I'm saying, it's putting forward that you get there at death. They give different methods. Sometimes they say, without a doubt, they say, without a doubt, you'll get it. It's like almost asserting that. And there's different ways of, sometimes it's a suggestion. So there's different ways of putting this information forward. Here is putting it without a doubt. 3 ways of doing it. Sometimes it's a quote from a sage, as originally Tim was asking, sometimes Tim was saying that sometimes it's a statement. Other times there's a logic and reason given. Very rarely it's an imposition where they say, this is what it is, do it, or if you don't do it, this will happen immediately. And very rarely they use that method. But here he's putting, without a doubt, you get it if you refine your vasanas. So you keep continuing and getting into a rebirth. But if your mind's focused, one gets to the south. That's what it's trying to say. The death. That's what we have to think about. Let's read it.
Man is the architect of his destiny. His thinking makes or mars his life. Some reach great heights of perfection through their noble thoughts. Others degrade themselves through their base thoughts. As you think, so you become. This verse and the next pronounce this truth clearly.
So if you take anything, go away from this class, just as you think, so you become. You want to entertain negative thoughts, gossip here, there, that's going on in the world. Think about how that's cluttering up your mind. If you've got something nobler, think about where that's taking you. It's refining you, enables you more to serve. Or you get bogged down with all the negativities. So where are your thoughts? Let's go next, Barry.
Brahman pervades both the terrestrial world and the transcendental reality. Your thoughts can either remain in the world or focus upon the reality, the supreme self within. Focusing your thoughts constantly on the self, you reach the self. At the time of self-realization, you drop your causal and subtle bodies and merge with the self. The causal body consists of unmanifest vasanas, the inherent, innate, individual nature of every being. The subtle body comprises manifest vasanas in the form of thoughts, desires, and emotions. The gross body constitutes the physical body, which houses the causal and subtle bodies. When the causal and subtle bodies move from one gross body to another, they cause the death of the first and birth of the second body. Death and birth only mark the passage of the individual from one gross body to another for fulfilling his vasanas and desires. But when the causal and subtle bodies themselves are extinct, the individual merges with the Supreme Self. He becomes one with Brahman, with God. This verse points to the culmination of the individual life.
So, just to summarize that, you have a causal, subtle, and gross body. Just recapping what you all probably already know. The gross body, you see the gross body. In the gross body that houses the subtle body, which is your mind and intellect. Your thoughts pass through either your mind or your intellect. And when they pass through, your body acts as the vehicle to act on those thoughts which keep, when they're compounded together, become a desire and force you into action. Where do the thoughts come from? The thoughts are manifested in your mind, but unmanifest thoughts are your vasanas, your innate tendencies, your innate nature. That's your causal body which holds that. So at the time of death, you know your physical body perishes. It goes back to dust and dust to dust, as they say. But where do the thoughts go? Do they too perish? Should be your question. All that thinking that you do all day long, every day, do they just disintegrate into thin air? So in Vedanta, we say that no, they don't just disintegrate. Something can't just go into nothing. They get transferred. The resultant of that, whatever you've created, gets transferred into the next embodiment. So there's a cycle of reincarnation, it's suggesting, until all the vasanas get exhausted. So you actually, at the time of physical death, because you can no longer exhaust the vasanas in this embodiment, it doesn't suit you, whatever, you get promoted to the next embodiment, essentially. Though everybody else is crying around you, you're getting promoted. So, until your causal body, that which holds the seed of all your tendencies, is exhausted, only then do you get to the self. So your job is to get on with your vocation, your swadharmic nature, with the thought of something higher, or whatever it is you're doing, to keep refining your thoughts. So naturally that causal body is getting less and less in it, it's getting extinct. That's our job, till you merge with the self. So it's just like you've got a cloud in front of the sun, and all we're doing is removing the cloud so we know the sun is there. all-pervading sun is there, though it's always there anyway. We're just merging with that. So unless it's not one physical death that will get to the self, it's actually putting forward the method, what's happening. If that makes sense. Let's get to the next.
The verse clearly specifies the remembrance of the self at the time of death as the way to gain self-realization. Some interpret the meaning of these lines literally. They believe that the last thought alone decides one's reincarnation or realization, regardless of one's lifestyle. This does not stand to reason. How can all the vices of a lifetime be offset by one last thought of God? How can decades of mundane thoughts suddenly turn divine at the moment of death? In fact, your last thought will be the resultant of all your thoughts, the total effect of all the thoughts entertained by you in the past. If the last thought rests on the self, it only goes to prove that the past thoughts were also directed to the self. The appeal to mankind, therefore, is to direct their thoughts to the self while acting in the world.
Just complete the last part.
In the last line, Krishna assures Arjuna that one reaches the self undoubtedly by the above thought process. The Lord communicates the knowledge of self through three distinct ways. By quoting the ancient rishis, sages, through clear argument based on reason and logic, and by vehement declaration, the method he adopts in this verse.
Mm-hmm. So very rarely do we use that declaration, but here he's putting it forward like this. It's normally argument, reason, logic. So you can think it through and pull it out of yourself. Here he's asserting it. So we'll stop here and just have a think on it. So we look forward to the question next week. If anybody has any questions, you should bring it up at the beginning of the class too. So,
Thank you.